My name is Erin Thompson, 24 years old, and I never thought my own family would turn their backs on me when I needed them most. I still remember the exact moment when my world crumbled sitting at our dining table as my Aunt Barbara convinced my parents that supporting my education was unfair to her children. The worst part, they agreed. What followed was a betrayal so deep that it changed my understanding of family forever. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and hit subscribe if family drama hits close to home too. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in suburban Pennsylvania in a modest 2-story home with blue shutters and a small garden my mother tended religiously. My father, Jack, worked as an accountant at a local firm. He was always practical, logical, and believed in finding the path of least resistance, especially when it came to family matters. He valued harmony above almost everything else, often saying, "Family peace is worth its weight in gold, Erin." My mother, Diana, taught 3rd grade at the elementary school just 2 miles from our house. She loved her students deeply, but that same nurturing spirit sometimes manifested as people-pleasing in her personal life. She avoided conflict at all costs, especially with her younger sister, Barbara. Growing up, I noticed how my mom would often acquiesce to whatever Barbara wanted, whether it was changing holiday plans or rearranging seating at family gatherings. Aunt Barbara and Uncle Paul lived in a larger home in a more affluent neighborhood about 20 minutes away. Uncle Paul worked in pharmaceutical sales and made good money though. Barbara never seemed satisfied with what they had. She drove a luxury SUV and made sure everyone knew about their vacations to Europe or the Caribbean, yet there was always an undercurrent of competition when she visited our home. They had 3 children, Justin, who was 19 and had already dropped out of community college twice, Amanda, 21, who worked part-time at a clothing store while figuring out what she wanted to do with her life, and Zach, 23, who had been taking a gap year for the past 3 years while living at home and playing video games most days. The dynamic between my mother and Aunt Barbara had always been complicated. From snippets of conversations I overheard growing up and stories my grandmother Lillian shared, Barbara had always been jealous of Diana. My mother had married first, had me first, and seemed content with her life choices. Barbara, on the other hand, constantly seemed to be chasing something more. "Your wedding dress is beautiful, Diana, though I probably would have chosen something more elegant when my time comes," Barbara had said at my mother's wedding, according to Grandma Lillian. As a child, I witnessed countless moments of Barbara's passive-aggressive behavior. "Oh, you're still in that small house. I guess it works for your family." Or, "Diana, that casserole is so simple. I admire how you make do with basic ingredients." Each comment designed to subtly undermine my mother's choices while elevating her own. Over the years, Barbara crafted a narrative that somehow Diana's family, us, had always had it easier. It didn't matter that my parents worked hard, saved carefully, and lived within their means. In Barbara's version of reality, we had some mythical advantage that her family didn't. My grandmother Lillian was the one person who saw through Barbara's behavior and wasn't afraid to call it out. "Some people are so busy looking at what others have that they never appreciate their own blessings," she would tell me during our special Saturday afternoon visits. Grandma lived just a few blocks away in a small but immaculate house filled with books and the smell of freshly baked cookies. It was Grandma Lillian who encouraged my love of learning. She had been a nurse in her younger days at a time when women in her family were expected to marry young and start families. "Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you, Erin," she would say, eyes twinkling behind her wire-rimmed glasses. When I was accepted to Greenfield University with a partial scholarship, I became the first person in our immediate family to attend a prestigious school. My parents were proud, though somewhat bewildered by my academic ambitions. They had always expected I would attend the local state college like most kids from our town. "Are you sure you want to go so far away? State college is perfectly fine and much cheaper," my father had said when I showed him my acceptance letter. But I knew Greenfield was where I needed to be. Their psychology program was nationally ranked, and I had dreams of eventually becoming a clinical psychologist. After some discussion, my parents agreed to help support me financially, covering what my scholarship and student loans didn't. 4 years later, I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in psychology and a minor in sociology. The day I received my acceptance letter to Greenfield's graduate program for clinical psychology was one of the happiest of my life. I had worked incredibly hard, maintaining my scholarship while working part-time at the university library and as a research assistant. I called my parents immediately, bubbling with excitement. My mother squealed with joy, and even my father, never one for emotional displays, said he was proud of me. They invited me home that weekend for a family dinner to celebrate. Little did I know that this celebration would mark the beginning of the end of the family support I had taken for granted all my life. The day of my celebration dinner started out perfectly. My mother prepared my favorite meal, her special lasagna with garlic bread and a chocolate cake for dessert. My father even brought home a bottle of champagne, a rare indulgence in our household. To our brilliant daughter, he toasted, clinking his glass against mine. Graduate school. Who would have thought? For a brief shining moment, I felt wholly supported and loved. Then the doorbell rang. I hope you don't mind, my mother said suddenly, looking nervous. But I invited Barbara and Paul and the kids to join us. They were free tonight, and I thought family should be together for big moments. My heart sank a little, but I nodded and smiled. I should have known my mother would never let me have a special moment that didn't include her sister. Aunt Barbara swept in, wearing an expensive-looking dress that seemed excessive for a family dinner, her perfume filling our modest dining room. Uncle Paul followed with a half-hearted smile and a bottle of wine that my father immediately commented was the good stuff. So graduate school, Barbara said, after minimal congratulations, her voice already taking on that tone I'd grown to recognize over the years. That must be very expensive. I have a partial scholarship, I explained, trying to keep my voice upbeat, and I'll be working as a teaching assistant. But your parents will be helping too, I assume, Barbara pressed, looking pointedly at my father. We've always planned to help Erin with her education, my mother interjected quickly, just like you and Paul help your kids. Barbara's laugh was sharp. Well, our situation is different. Justin is taking time to find himself after community college didn't work out. Again, she sighed dramatically. Some kids just aren't built for academic pressure, and Amanda is gaining real-world experience in retail management. I noticed she didn't mention Zach, who as far as I knew hadn't worked a day in his life. As the evening progressed, the conversation somehow shifted entirely to Barbara's children's struggles. Justin's latest entrepreneurial idea, selling custom sneakers online, which had yet to result in a single sale. Amanda's promotion to shift supervisor at the mall clothing store. Zach's vague plans to maybe take some online courses eventually. It's just so hard for young people these days, Barbara lamented, swirling her wine. Unless you're naturally gifted like Erin, of course. The way she said gifted made it sound like I had cheated somehow. I noticed my father avoiding eye contact with me, and my mother quickly changed the subject to the upcoming family reunion. The celebration of my accomplishment had effectively ended. After dinner, I helped my mother clear the dishes, while Barbara held court in the living room. As I walked back toward the kitchen with a stack of plates, I overheard Barbara talking to my mother in hushed tones. I just don't understand why you make such a big deal about Erin's schooling when my kids are struggling to find their path. It feels like she's showing off Diana, and honestly, it makes my kids look bad. I froze, waiting for my mother to defend me, to point out that my accomplishments had nothing to do with her children's choices. Instead, I heard, "I'm sorry if it seems that way, Barb. You know we're proud of all our nieces and nephews too." I continued to the kitchen, my hands shaking slightly as I rinsed the dishes. The water couldn't wash away the sting of my mother's failure to stand up for me. Later that night, I visited Grandma Lillian to share my graduate school news. Her genuine joy was a balm to my wounded spirit. "I heard Barbara and the gang were at your celebration," she said, her eyes sharp despite her 82 years. "Yes," I replied, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. "And I'm guessing she managed to make it all about her kids somehow." I nodded, tears threatening. "Listen to me, Erin," Grandma said, taking my hands in her soft, wrinkled ones. "Barbara has been jealous of your mother since the day Diana took her first steps and got all the attention. Now that pattern is repeating with you and her children. Be careful, jealousy can make people do terrible things even to family." I tried to rationalize my family's behavior on the drive home. Maybe my mother was just trying to keep the peace. Maybe my father was distracted by work concerns. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But a small voice inside me whispered that something had shifted, and I was suddenly standing on much shakier family ground than I had realized. The next few months were a whirlwind as I prepared for graduate school while working 2 jobs to save as much money as possible. I waited tables at a local restaurant during the day and worked night shifts stocking shelves at a grocery store. Between shifts, I searched for affordable apartments near campus and calculated my budget down to the penny. My parents had promised to help with a portion of my expenses not covered by my scholarship and loans, about $500 a month, toward rent and utilities. It wasn't a huge amount, but it would make the difference between working 2 jobs and 3 during school. 2 months before classes were set to begin, I visited my parents to discuss the financial arrangements we had previously agreed upon. So I found an apartment that's within my budget if I include the monthly help you offered, I said, spreading my carefully prepared spreadsheet on the kitchen table. It's small but close to campus, which will save on transportation costs. My parents exchanged an uncomfortable glance that immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. About that, Erin, my father began clearing his throat. We've been looking at our finances and things are a bit tighter than we expected this year. Your father's company reduced their 401k match, my mother added quickly, and we had to put a new roof on the house last month. None of this was news to me, and neither expense should have significantly impacted their ability to help with the relatively modest sum we had discussed. I see, I said slowly. So you're saying you can't help at all or just not the full amount? Another glance between them. We're thinking maybe you should consider taking a year off, my father suggested. Work full-time, save up like your cousins are doing. The comparison to my cousins felt like a slap. Justin wasn't taking a year off, he had dropped out. Amanda had never even started college, and Zach was approaching his 4th year of doing nothing productive whatsoever. I've already accepted my place in the program, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Deferring could mean losing my scholarship and teaching assistant position. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. We just think a little breathing room might be good for you. You've always pushed yourself so hard. Over the next few weeks, I noticed my parents organizing more family gatherings than usual. Sunday dinners, a barbecue for Uncle Paul's birthday, a Saturday brunch, just because. Barbara was present at every event, holding court like a queen bee, while my mother fluttered around her anxiously. During these gatherings, Barbara began openly comparing my educational choices to her children's practical path. Erin's still set on that fancy graduate degree, she announced during Uncle Paul's birthday barbecue. Meanwhile, Amanda just got promoted to assistant manager real-world experience. That's what employers value these days. Amanda, who hadn't even wanted to attend college, smirked at me from across the patio. Later, as I was helping to clean up, she cornered me by the recycling bins. You know, not everyone needs to show off with some big-shot degree, she said. Some of us are actually making money instead of spending it. But I guess you think you're better than everyone. I've never said or thought that, I replied, shocked by her hostility. Different paths work for different people. Whatever, Amanda snapped. Just stop making everyone feel bad because you think you're so smart. What hurt Mosidu during these confrontations wasn't just my cousin's unwarranted resentment, but my parents' silence. They would stand by saying nothing as Barbara or her children made snide remarks about my education. Later, they would offer weak justifications. Amanda is just sensitive right now, my mother would say. She's trying to find her way. Your aunt means well, my father would add. Family harmony is important, Erin. Sometimes we need to let things slide. During a particularly emotional visit to my grandmother, I broke down in tears after yet another family dinner where Barbara had dominated the conversation with thinly veiled criticisms of my choices. I don't understand what's happening, I sobbed. It's like my parents are choosing Aunt Barbara over me. Grandma Lillian's face was grim. Family jealousy is an ugly thing, my dear. Barbara has spent a lifetime resenting your mother for her happiness and stability. Now she resents you for your achievements because they highlight what her children haven't accomplished. But why are my parents going along with it? I asked, wiping my eyes. Because it's easier, Grandma said simply. Standing up to a bully takes courage, even when that bully is your sister. Diana has spent her whole life trying to please Barbara, and your father has spent his married life trying to keep the peace. Despite the growing pressure from my family, I remained determined to pursue my graduate education. I picked up a third part-time job doing data entry from home and adjusted my budget to account for the lack of parental support. I spent less time at family gatherings making excuses about work schedules and study preparations. The final blow came when I stopped by my parents' house unexpectedly one evening to drop off some gardening magazines for my mother. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Zach getting out of a brand new compact car with my father admiring it from the porch. "Sweet ride, right?" Zach was saying as I approached. Mom and Dad covered most of it, but Uncle Jack and Aunt Diana helped with the down payment. Family looking out for family, you know. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My parents, who claimed they couldn't afford to help with my education, had somehow found money to help my cousin buy a car, a cousin who didn't work, didn't study, and as far as I could tell, had no plans to do either. That night, I lay awake, trying to make sense of what was happening. The only conclusion I could reach was that my educational success had somehow become a threat to the family narrative Barbara had constructed, and my parents were choosing the path of least resistance, appeasing Barbara rather than supporting me. The pivotal Sunday dinner happened in early August, just 3 weeks before I was set to begin graduate school. The weather was oppressively hot and humid, matching my increasingly dark mood as I drove to my parents' house. I had been considering skipping the dinner entirely, but my mother had called twice, insisting that I come, saying she'd made my favorite dessert and missed seeing me. As usual, Barbara and her family arrived just as we were sitting down to eat. Barbara breezed in, ear-kissing my mother's cheek and handing her a store-bought pie that would inevitably be compared favorably to my mother's homemade one. "We have some news," Barbara announced as soon as the water glasses were filled. She placed her hand on Justin's shoulder. "Justin has decided that college isn't the right path for him right now. He's going to focus on his entrepreneurial ventures full-time." From what I had observed, these ventures consisted mainly of half-baked ideas that never materialized into anything concrete. The current one involved designing custom phone cases, though I hadn't seen him produce a single one. "That's wonderful, Justin," my mother said warmly. "You have to follow your own path." "Exactly," Barbara continued, her voice gaining momentum. "That's what we've realized as parents. There are many different paths to success. Not everyone needs to follow the traditional educational route." Her eyes flickered to me briefly, and I knew what was coming. "Some young people thrive in academic settings like Erin," she continued, her voice syrupy sweet. "But others have different gifts. Justin has such creativity. Amanda has remarkable people skills. And Zach is a strategic thinker." I nearly choked on my water at the description of Zach, whose strategic thinking seemed limited to video game tactics. "The important thing," Barbara said, leaning forward intensely, "is that as parents and as a family, we support each child equally according to their needs and choices." The emphasis on equally hung in the air like a thundercloud. "What exactly are you saying, Barbara?" my father asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew. Barbara straightened, clearly pleased to have been invited to continue. "Well, Jack, I've been thinking about fairness within our family. Diana and you have been so generous, supporting Erin's education, the undergraduate degree at that expensive university, and now graduate school. Erin earned scholarships," my grandmother interjected firmly. She had been invited to dinner as well, though now I wondered if my mother regretted including her. "Yes, partial scholarships," Barbara acknowledged with a dismissive wave. "But Jack and Diana have still contributed substantially. Meanwhile, my children have chosen different paths that don't come with fancy scholarships or academic recognition, but they still need family support." I sat, frozen fork suspended midway to my mouth, as I realized this dinner had been orchestrated for this very conversation. "Are you suggesting we haven't supported your children, Barbara?" my mother asked, her voice unusually tight. "Not at all," Barbara replied smoothly. "You've been generous with birthday gifts and the occasional help, like with Zach's car, but the level of financial support isn't comparable to what Erin receives, and it makes my children feel less valued." "That's not fair, Aunt Barbara." I finally found my voice. "My parents agreed to help with my education because I'm working hard, maintaining scholarships, and building toward a career. It's not about valuing me more." Barbara's expression hardened slightly. "Is that so? Because from where I sit, it looks like the academic achiever gets the financial support, while my kids are left to struggle because their talents lie elsewhere." The silence around the table was deafening. I looked to my father for support, but he was staring at his plate, a conflicted expression on his face. "Jack," Barbara said, turning her attention fully to my father, "as the financial head of your household, don't you think there's an inequality here? You should stop supporting Erin's education because it makes my kids look bad. They see their cousin getting thousands of dollars for school while they're trying to make their way without that kind of support." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Barbara wasn't even trying to disguise her reasoning anymore. She was explicitly saying that my success made her children look bad and therefore I shouldn't be supported. What happened next shattered my world. My father nodded slowly. "Maybe Barbara has a point about fairness," he said, not meeting my eyes. "We want to support all our family members equally." "Dad," I exclaimed, feeling tears spring to my eyes, "this isn't about fairness. This is about Aunt Barbara being jealous of my accomplishments." "Erin," my mother said sharply, "that's not a nice thing to say." "But it's true," I insisted, looking around the table in disbelief. "Grandma, tell them." My grandmother looked genuinely distressed. Diana Jack, you can't seriously be considering this. Erin has worked incredibly hard, and my children haven't, Barbara interrupted, voice rising. Just because they don't have fancy degrees doesn't mean they don't deserve support. Of course they deserve support, my father said soothingly. And Erin, we're proud of you, but maybe Barbara is right. Maybe we need to distribute our family resources more equitably. What resources? I asked, my voice cracking. You already told me you can't help with graduate school, even though we had an agreement. Meanwhile, you helped Zach buy a car. Zach had the grace to look uncomfortable, at least. That was different, my mother said weakly. That was just a one-time thing. And my education is my future. I cried, tears now flowing freely. I can't believe you're doing this. You're choosing Aunt Barbara's jealousy over your own daughter's education. Now, Erin, my father began sternly. No, I said, standing up and throwing my napkin down. I won't sit here and listen to this. Aunt Barbara has always been jealous of Mum, and now she's jealous of me on behalf of her kids. And instead of standing up for me, you're giving in to keep the peace. I looked directly at my parents, feeling something break inside me. I always thought family meant supporting each other. I guess blood doesn't always mean loyalty. With that, I grabbed my purse and walked out, ignoring my mother's calls to come back. Through my tears, I drove straight to my grandmother's house, the only place I felt truly safe and valued. I barely made it to Grandma Lillian's front porch before collapsing into sobs. She opened the door in her nightgown, took one look at my face, and pulled me into her arms without a word. For several minutes, she just held me while I cried, stroking my hair like she had when I was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. When my sobs finally subsided into hiccups, she led me to her cozy living room and made us both tea with honey, her remedy for all of life's hardships. They agreed with her. I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. Barbara said they should stop supporting me because it makes her kids look bad, and they actually agreed with her. Grandma's face darkened with anger, an expression I rarely saw on her gentle features. I'm calling your mother right now, she said, reaching for her phone. No, I stopped her, placing my hand over hers. I need to handle this myself. I'm not a child anymore, even if they're treating me like one. The reality of my situation began to sink in as I sat in my grandmother's floral armchair clutching my tea. Without my parents' promised support, my carefully constructed financial plan for graduate school was in ruins. Even with my scholarships, teaching assistantship, and part-time jobs, I would struggle to make ends meet. I might have to drop out before I even start. I whispered the thought, sending fresh tears down my cheeks. Absolutely not, Grandma said firmly. We will figure this out, Erin. Your education is too important. That night, I slept in Grandma's guest room, the same room where I'd spent countless childhood sleepovers. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, calculating and recalculating my finances, considering additional loans, wondering if I could somehow work even more hours without jeopardizing my studies. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house to collect some belongings I'd been storing there. I had decided to move to campus early, even if it meant staying with friends temporarily until my apartment was ready. My mother was waiting anxiously in the kitchen when I arrived. Her eyes were puffy, suggesting she had been crying too. Erin, we need to talk about yesterday, she began. Yes, we do. I agreed, my voice calmer than I felt. You and Dad made a promise to help me with graduate school. Now you're breaking that promise because Aunt Barbara is jealous. It's not that simple, my father said, entering the kitchen. We've been thinking about fairness in the family for a while. Fairness, I repeated incredulously. Is it fair that I worked hard for scholarships, maintained a 4-point GPA, and got accepted to a competitive graduate program, only to have my own parents withdraw support because it might hurt my cousin's feelings? Is that your definition of fairness? Your cousins are struggling, my mother said softly. Barbara is worried about them. And I'm your daughter, I responded, my voice breaking. Shouldn't you be worried about me? Of course we are, my father insisted. But we need to consider the whole family. Your aunt made some valid points about equity. No, she didn't, I interrupted. She made selfish points about her own insecurities. And instead of seeing through it, you're enabling her just like you always have. My mother began to cry again. We just want peace in the family, Erin. Barbara has always been sensitive about comparisons. So I have to suffer because Aunt Barbara can't handle the fact that I'm succeeding. Mum, listen to yourself. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Look, I came to get my things. I'm moving out today. You don't have to do that, my father said, alarmed. This is still your home. Is it? I challenged. Because it doesn't feel that way. Not when you choose appeasing Aunt Barbara over supporting your own daughter. As I packed my belongings, I discovered something that reignited my anger. On my father's desk was a checkbook with the carbon copies still intact. The most recent check was made out to Amanda for $1,500 with apartment deposit written in the memo line. I brought the checkbook to the kitchen. So you can't afford to help me with graduate school, but you can give Amanda $1,500 for an apartment deposit, an apartment she's sharing with 3 friends and barely paying anything for. My parents exchanged guilty looks. That was different, my father stammered. It was a one-time emergency. Stop lying to me, I shouted, slapping the checkbook down on the counter. Just admit the truth. You're letting Aunt Barbara manipulate you because it's easier than standing up to her. You're sacrificing my future for family harmony with a woman who has been jealous of Mom her entire life. My mother dissolved into tears again, but this time I didn't feel any sympathy. A lifetime of her enabling Barbara's behavior had led to this moment. I'll figure this out on my own, I said, picking up my bags. I always knew graduate school would be hard. I just never imagined the hardest part would be being betrayed by my own parents. With those words, I walked out of my childhood home, got into my 10-year-old Honda with 160,000 miles on it, and drove away unsure of where I was going, but certain of one thing: I would never again depend on family, who could so easily turn their backs on me. I found a tiny studio apartment near campus, barely 500 square feet, with a kitchenette so small I could touch both walls with my outstretched arms. The rent was still more than I could comfortably afford, but it was the cheapest option that didn't involve sketchy roommates or a dangerous neighborhood. To make ends meet, I took on a 3rd job delivering food on weekends. Between my teaching assistantship, library work, and delivery gig, I was working nearly 60 hours a week before classes even started. I was exhausted, stressed, and heartbroken, but I was determined not to let Barbara or my parents win. The first weeks of graduate school passed in a blur of exhaustion. I would wake before dawn to prepare for my teaching assistant duties, attend my own classes during the day, work at the library in the evenings, and deliver food on weekends. Most nights I collapsed into bed too tired even to cry about my family situation. My academic performance began to suffer almost immediately. During an early morning seminar on cognitive assessment techniques, Professor Winters, the department chair, called on me to answer a question, only to find me struggling to keep my eyes open. "Ms. Thompson, perhaps you could see me after class," she said, her voice concerned rather than angry. In her office later, Professor Winters asked directly, "Erin, what's going on? Your application was exceptional, but you seem to be struggling already." I tried to maintain my composure, but weeks of exhaustion and emotional turmoil caught up with me. To my horror, I burst into tears right there in her office. Between sobs, I explained my situation, the withdrawn family support, my 3 jobs, the betrayal that still felt raw every time I thought about it. Professor Winters listened attentively, occasionally taking notes. When I finally managed to compose myself, she handed me a tissue and said something that would change the course of my graduate career. "The psychology department has an emergency scholarship fund for students in crisis. It's not widely advertised, but it exists for situations exactly like yours. I'd like you to apply immediately." I stared at her in disbelief. I didn't know such a thing existed. "Few people do," she replied with a small smile. "It was created by an alumnus who nearly dropped out due to family financial issues. The application requires an essay explaining your circumstances and why your education matters to you." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly extinguished by doubt. "I'm not sure I can write about this," I admitted. "It's still so painful, and I'm embarrassed that my family would act this way." Professor Winters leaned forward, her expression serious. "Erin, family dynamics can be incredibly complex and painful. As psychologists, we understand that better than most. The committee doesn't need to know every detail, but honesty about your situation will help them understand the urgency." That night, I sat in my tiny apartment with my laptop open, trying to find the words to explain my situation without sounding like I was asking for pity. After several false starts, I decided to approach it as I would a case study, with emotional honesty but professional detachment. I wrote about growing up in a family where peacekeeping was valued above all, where my aunt's jealousy had been allowed to fester unchecked for decades. I explained how my educational pursuits had become collateral damage in this dysfunctional dynamic. Most importantly, I wrote about why becoming a clinical psychologist mattered to me, how I wanted to help others navigate family trauma and betrayal. 2 weeks after submitting my application, I received an email from the scholarship committee. They had awarded me the full emergency funding, enough to cover most of my living expenses for the academic year. Additionally, Professor Winters had arranged for me to take on a second teaching assistantship that would provide further income while still allowing me to focus on my studies. The financial relief was enormous, but even more significant was the emotional validation. A committee of strangers had evaluated my situation and deemed my education worthy of support when my own family had not. With my immediate financial crisis addressed, I finally had the emotional space to consider how to handle my family situation going forward. After much reflection and a few sessions with a therapist from the University Counselling Centre, I decided to establish clear boundaries. I called my parents one evening after carefully rehearsing what I wanted to say. I'm calling to let you know that I've found alternative financial support for my education. I began keeping my voice steady. I've also been thinking about our relationship moving forward. Erin, we've been so worried, my mother interrupted. We've called and texted. I needed space, I explained. What happened hurt me deeply. You chose Aunt Barbara's jealousy over supporting me, and I'm still processing that betrayal. We never meant to hurt you, my father said. We were just trying to be fair to everyone. It wasn't fair, Dad, I cut in. And I need you to understand that. Your decision wasn't about fairness, it was about taking the path of least resistance with Aunt Barbara as you've always done. There was a long silence before my mother spoke again. What do you want from us now, Erin? I want you to respect my boundaries, I said firmly. I won't be attending family gatherings where Aunt Barbara and her family are present for the foreseeable future. I need time and space to heal. I'm willing to maintain a relationship with you both, but it will be different than before. My grandmother, true to her supportive nature, offered to help me financially, despite her limited retirement income. Initially, I refused, not wanting to burden her, but she insisted on sending me a small amount each month. This is my choice, she said firmly. No one is manipulating me into it. I believe in you and your education, and I want to help. As the fall semester progressed, I found myself drawing closer to a group of fellow graduate students who came from similar backgrounds, first-generation college students, or those who lacked family support. What began as casual study sessions evolved into deep friendships built on mutual understanding and encouragement. Maya, whose parents had cut her off when she chose psychology over the family business, suggested we formalize our support network. We should create a group for students like us, she proposed during one of our study sessions. People who are making it work without traditional family support. The idea resonated with all of us. Within weeks, we had established Chosen Connections, a support group for graduate students navigating education without family backing. We secured a small grant from the Student Affairs Office to provide occasional emergency assistance to members facing acute financial crises. Helping others who shared similar struggles gave me a sense of purpose beyond my own situation. Each time I could offer advice or support to another student, I felt my own wounds begin to heal. My personal betrayal was being transformed into a force for positive change. As winter approached, I received a text from my cousin Amanda asking if we could meet for coffee. Curious and cautious, I agreed to a brief meeting at a campus cafe. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, she said after we'd settled with our drinks. I was jealous of you. It was easier to put you down than to admit I was intimidated by your success. Her honesty surprised me. Thank you for saying that, I replied. But I never thought less of you for choosing a different path. Amanda nodded, looking down at her coffee. I know that now. I think I was just absorbing my mom's attitude without questioning it. She hesitated, then added, she's always been weirdly competitive with your mom, you know, and then with you doing so well. It became about me versus you and your brothers, I finished for her. Something like that, she admitted. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that not all of us agree with how things went down. Jesse, I want to say again. That conversation didn't magically repair my family relationships, but it was the first crack in the wall of pain and resentment I had built. It reminded me that family dynamics were complex, and sometimes even those caught in toxic patterns could begin to recognize their participation. As the semester drew to a close, I found myself not just surviving, but beginning to thrive. My grades had improved, my research was receiving positive feedback, and I had created a support system that, while different from traditional family backing, was perhaps more reliable, because it was built on genuine understanding rather than obligation. I still had moments of sadness and anger about my parents' betrayal, but they no longer consumed me. Instead, I channeled those emotions into my studies and my growing passion for helping others navigate family trauma, a specialization I was increasingly drawn to as I processed my own experience. By the time the holiday break arrived, I had made a decision I would focus on building the life and career I wanted, with or without my family's support. Their actions had taught me a painful but valuable lesson. Blood doesn't always mean loyalty, but that didn't mean I couldn't find loyalty elsewhere. 2.5 years later, I stood in my graduation regalia, preparing to receive my master's degree in clinical psychology. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as families gathered to celebrate their graduates. My own family occupied a row near the front, my grandmother Lillian, now using a cane but still sharp as ever at 85. Maya and our other close friends from chosen connections. Professor Winters, who had become a mentor and advocate, and somewhat awkwardly, my parents. After nearly a year of minimal contact, my parents had reached out the previous Christmas, asking if we could try to repair our relationship. Our reconciliation had been tentative and fragile, marked by difficult conversations and occasional setbacks. They had never fully acknowledged the depth of their betrayal, but they had made efforts to understand my perspective. Aunt Barbara was noticeably absent from the ceremony, though I hadn't expected her to attend. According to my mother, Barbara's children were still finding their way. Justin had cycled through several more business ideas without success. Amanda had actually enrolled in community college courses, inspired partly my mother hinted by our conversation. Zach remained at home, though he had finally taken a part-time job at a gaming store. As I waited for my name to be called, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that devastating Sunday dinner. The betrayal that had nearly derailed my education had ultimately led me to discover strengths I hadn't known I possessed. Erin Thompson, Master of Science in Clinical Psychology with Honours, the Dean announced. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma, I heard my grandmother's distinctive whistle, a skill she'd learned as a young nurse, trying to flag down doctors in busy hospital corridors. The sound made me smile through tears. After the ceremony, my grandmother hugged me fiercely. "I always knew you could do it," she whispered, even when others doubted. My parents approached cautiously, bearing flowers and tentative smiles. "We're very proud of you, Erin," my father said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," I replied, accepting the flowers. Our relationship remained a work in progress, but I had learned to accept their limitations while protecting my own boundaries. Later that evening, at a small celebration dinner with my chosen family, Maya raised her glass in a toast. To Erin, who showed us all that sometimes the family you create is stronger than the family you're born into. In the weeks following graduation, I learnt through my mother that Barbara's children were facing continued challenges. Justin had accumulated significant debt from his failed ventures. Zach had been asked to move out by my uncle, but had no savings or plan. Amanda was the only one showing signs of stability, working part-time while attending school. Ironically, my parents had finally begun to establish their own boundaries with Barbara. My mother revealed during a lunch that my grandmother had given her an ultimatum after my graduation. She told me I had to choose between appeasing my sister and having a relationship with my daughter. My mother admitted, looking embarrassed. She said she was tired of watching Barbara manipulate everyone. "Grandma always did see things clearly," I commented. My mother nodded. She also pointed out that none of Barbara's children are any better off for all the protection from comparison. If anything, they're struggling more because they never learnt to face challenges. This conversation led to a deeper one, where my mother finally acknowledged her lifelong pattern of giving in to Barbara's demands and jealousy. "I always thought keeping the peace was the most important thing," she said. "I never realized how much damage that peace cost." My father, too, had begun to recognize his role in enabling the dysfunction. During a rare moment of vulnerability, he admitted, "I thought I was being fair and diplomatic, but really I was just avoiding conflict. I'm sorry that came at your expense, Erin." Their apologies didn't erase the past, but they helped me move forward with less bitterness. I had learned that forgiveness didn't require forgetting or even fully trusting again. It simply meant not allowing the hurt to control my future. Shortly after I began my first position as a clinical psychologist at a community mental health centre, my grandmother Lillian's health began to deteriorate rapidly. The woman who had been my rock throughout the family crisis was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, and within months, she was moved to hospice care. Her illness brought the family together in ways I hadn't expected. Even Barbara visited the hospice, though the long-standing tension between the sisters was evident in their stilted interactions. Grandma Lillian, even in her weakened state, maintained her forthright nature. "Barbara," she said during one visit when we were all present, I hope you've learned something from watching your children struggle. Success isn't a limited resource. Erin's achievements don't take anything away from your kids. Barbara had flushed but said nothing. Some patterns were too deeply ingrained to change even in the face of irrefutable evidence. The day my grandmother passed away was one of the most painful of my life, but also strangely unifying for our fractured family. At her funeral, I delivered a eulogy celebrating her wisdom, strength, and unwavering support. Grandma Lillian taught me that real family is defined by actions, not blood. I said my voice steady despite my grief. She showed me that one person's genuine support can outweigh a dozen half-hearted connections. In the months following Grandma's death, I channeled my grief into action. I established a small scholarship in her name specifically for psychology students who lacked family financial support. It wasn't large, funded initially by my modest salary and contributions from friends who had known her, but it symbolized everything she had stood for. I also continued to develop my specialization in family trauma and betrayal. My personal experience, while painful, had given me insights that helped me connect with clients navigating their own complex family dynamics. Nearly a year after Grandma's passing, I ran into my cousin Amanda at a local coffee shop. She had completed her associate's degree and transferred to a 4-year college to study business administration. "I wanted to thank you," she said, after updating me on her progress. "Watching you stand your ground against everyone, including your parents, it made me realize I was letting my mother's expectations and comparisons define me. I'm glad something positive came from that situation." I replied, genuinely happy for her growing independence. "I was jealous of you for so long," Amanda admitted. "It was easier than admitting I was unhappy with my own choices. Mum always made it seem like you thought you were better than us, but that wasn't it at all, was it?" "No," I said simply. "I just wanted to follow my own path and have my family support that choice the way I would have supported yours." Amanda nodded thoughtfully. "I get that now. And for what it's worth, I think my mum was wrong to pressure your parents the way she did. I think she was trying to make herself feel better about her own insecurities as a parent." That conversation with Amanda represented another small step in my healing journey. While my relationship with Aunt Barbara would likely never be close, knowing that at least one of my cousins had broken free from the cycle of jealousy and comparison gave me hope. As I built my career and eventually my own family, I carried the lessons of that betrayal with me. I became deliberate about choosing who to include in my inner circle, valuing actions over words, support over criticism, celebration over jealousy. When my own daughter was born 3 years later, I made a silent promise to her in the hospital: "I will always support your dreams, even when they're different from what I might have chosen for you. I will celebrate your successes instead of seeing them as a reflection on me. And I will teach you that family is defined by love and loyalty, not simply by blood." The family wound had scarred over, leaving me both more vulnerable and stronger. I had learned to forgive without forgetting to establish boundaries, without building walls, and most importantly, to create the family I needed, rather than expecting it from those who weren't capable of providing it. The betrayal that once threatened to derail my future had instead shaped it in unexpected ways, leading me to a career helping others navigate similar pain and to a deeper understanding of what family truly means. Blood may not always guarantee loyalty, but the connections we choose and nurture can create bonds even stronger than those we're born with. Has your family ever disappointed you when you needed them most? Have you ever had to create your own support system when traditional family failed you? Share your story in the comments below and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through family challenges. Remember, sometimes the most powerful families are the ones we create ourselves. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you recognize and value the true loyalty in your own life.